In the early 80s, arcades ruled over the gaming scene. Some console games were starting to get made for consoles like the Atari 2600, but their capabilities paled in comparison to those of arcade machines, and things didn't get any better for them as the console game market completely crashed back at 1983, meaning the arcades continued to reign supreme. But 2 years later, the NES came out, and with its high capabilities, it became clear that console games were the true way of the future. And while most arcade machines were still stronger than the NES was still strong enough to play more than enough video games. So from the late 80s to early 90s, arcades slowly started to vanish. But that still left a time where the two coexisted, and that is how we got games like Haunted Castle. While Castlevania was doing well as Konami's makeshift home console series, it only made sense to branch out to the still popular arcades in order to expand the Castlevania name. But unlike most of Konami's other arcade classics, Haunted Castle is very poorly regarded nowadays, and it's often considered to be one of the worst titles in the entire series. It's apparently so bad that it even has an article on the Crappy Games wiki, while Vampire Killer doesn't have one. Though that's probably mostly because of how obscure it is, so someone get on making that. I mean, it was listed as the number 6 most popular arcade title in Japanese game magazine Game Machine, though that issue was apparently released on April 1st, so take that with a grain of salt. Who knows what the rest of that list looks like? God. I first gave Haunted Castle a shot immediately after I was underwhelmed by Vampire Killer earlier this very year. And what do you know? I hated Haunted Castle too. And I didn't even finish the first stage, as I just gave up and moved on to something else. But just like Vampire Killer before it, I am willing to give Haunted Castle the benefit of the doubt. I do remember liking it more than Vampire Killer, if that says anything, and I am interested in seeing where it fails and where it succeeds, but I am also definitely keeping my expectations low this time around. So with that said, this is Haunted Castle on the arcades. Damn it, they forgot to use the Castlevania name again! I absolutely don't get the title Haunted Castle. Like, that's just Dracula's castle, aka Castlevania. Why do you have to crush my dreams like this again, Konami? But anyways, Haunted Castle's plot is blinking and you miss it. We see Simon Belmont, now sporting blue hair, walk alongside his newlywed wife Selena. But as they are walking, that son of a bitch Dracula immediately shows up to kidnap Selena and runs the hell away. And so, it's up to Simon to save her. Don't really have much to say about the story this time around. It's your typical damsel in distress premise, which I was honestly never really a fan of, to be honest. It does at the very least slot in pretty nicely after the good ending of Simon's quest, where we see Dracula's arm rising out of his grave. And it is fun to see how much hate Dracula harbors towards Simon at this point, as his first objective after coming back is to just immediately kidnap his wife. What an absolute bastard. It made Simon so pissed off that he just threw away his tuxedo in frustration. But luckily for him, there was some barbarian armor behind it. Always gotta be prepared for shit like this. Graphically speaking, this is the first game in the series to be in 16-bit. And I'm not sure if I could explain it that well, but visually, Haunted Castle always looked kinda off to me, and here is my best guess as to why. When interpreting 8-bit sprites into 16-bit, there are often many approaches you can take. Do you make the character's proportions more realistic? Do you stick closer to the official artwork? How much of the screen will your character take? What the hell even are bits? Since this is the first time Castlevania went 16-bit, you could tell that they had a tough time with the earlier questions. As Haunted Castle's art style is pretty unique for the series. It's a bit more of a cartoony art style, with far bigger character sprites than its predecessors. But to its credit, the sprites are often pretty well done. The main thing that always throws me off are the character animations, which is another thing they largely had to interpret from the 8-bit games. So what we ended up with is Simon walking looking like he's sick, and the skeletons just joyfully taking a stroll around town. All I could really say is that I don't think Haunted Castle visually aged very well, though to be honest, that's not really its fault, as the series would later take on a very different art style, making Haunted Castle just stick out like a sore thumb in comparison. I mean, I do like what they did with the HUD though. It's kinda like a mix between the HUDs of the first game and Simon's Quest. It displays all of the info it needs to without taking up too much screen space, even if it does tend to get hidden by foreground elements often. Weird layering oversight for sure. One very notable thing that Haunted Castle was the first in the series to implement is gore, which would become a mainstay in most later titles in the series. There are two reasons why it could pull it off. The first and more obvious one is that it was the most graphically advanced in the series yet, so it could pull off a lot more fancy tricks. And the second would probably have to do with Nintendo's old guidelines. You see, back in the late 80s and early 90s, before video game rating systems were implemented, Nintendo had a very strict policy on what they let people put in their games, so anything that was deemed too PG-13 or above would not be allowed. And that was even more so true for their Western releases. That's basically the main reason why everyone used to consider Nintendo a baby company, despite them removing those guidelines long ago. But with Haunted Castle being an arcade game, Konami didn't have to listen to no stupid Nintendo, and had a lot more freedom to put whatever they please in it. So that's how we ended up with the game having some bloody zombies, rivers and tears. So, funny story. When I first heard that some Castlevania titles had a bit of blood when you strike down enemies, I was fucking outraged. Why do these games have so much blood? How could these be considered masterpieces? They're just trying way too hard to be edgy. Listen, I was young and stupid, okay? But I did go on to play more and more of the games, and as they go on, they throw out so much blood at you, to the point where it just completely stopped phasing me later on. And don't even get me started on the Netflix show, oh god. But I did grow to like the gore. It definitely adds to the atmosphere, and helps the graphics pop out with more spectacle. So thank you Castlevania for helping me get used to blood. I am so fucking pathetic. But where was I? Oh yeah, this is a video about Haunted Castle. Sorry for getting so sidetracked on being an idiot kid. So before we move on to the gameplay, I just have to say, wow. Because Haunted Castle has my favorite OST in the series of the games we've covered so far. While the composers were very smart to use the NES hardware to produce some great chiptunes, they were still clearly held back by it. So with this title being on far more powerful hardware, it let them go fucking wild. All of the tracks in this game are just so damn good! From the excellent first stage theme, Cross Your Heart, to the catchy as hell basement melodies, and what is by far my favorite track in the game, the final stage theme, Don't Wait Until Night. Oh, and it also has a remix of Bloody Tears, as if it needed any more than to be awesome. And the stage with the Bloody Tears theme has a portrait letting out a bloody tear. It's perfect. I'm honestly shocked they bothered going so hard on this OST, considering that this is originally played in arcades, meaning that you won't hear this, you would hear something closer to this. Definitely not a complaint, just a funny observation of mine. But yeah, while most of what I said sounds pretty great, this is sadly where things will definitely start to go downhill, as we talk about Haunted Castle's gameplay. Instead of following the revamped non-linear formula from Vampire Killer and Simon's Quest, Haunted Castle is much closer to the original Castlevania in terms of design, with 6 linear levels, following Simon's journey from the local graveyard to Dracula's weirdest castle. That's a thing he takes from Simon's Quest that I like. The first third of the game doesn't actually take place in Dracula's castle, but is instead about Simon making it there, which is supported by this nifty little map screen you get to see between levels. Controls are mostly the same as the previous installments, but a minor difference is that when you jump in place, you can still decide to start moving Simon forward mid-jump. I have never found a single use for this throughout the entire game, but I still find it weird. To be honest, it was probably just an oversight by the devs. Simon does feel a bit slower in this game compared to the first one, but I think that's mostly because of how stupid his walking animation is, combined with levels often having long stretches of nothing. But I have a bit of a different issue here this time, and that is the camera, believe it or not. As you move around in this game, sometimes you'll be moving up and down pretty quickly. Haunted Castle actually doesn't have any screen transitions within its stages, which is pretty cool, but the issue is that as you move around, the camera follows you at an absolute snail's pace, meaning you often have to wait for it to catch up with you before you can keep moving, which is not the most entertaining thing out there, believe it or not. Simon's Quest technically did have this issue too, but I didn't mind it in that game as much, mostly because it was far less common in that game. and for how brainless Simon's quest was. Not saying I liked it there, just that I dislike it here more. Many of the items you get also saw quite a lot of changes. For example, the whip upgrades. In the original game, the first upgrade would give you the chain whip, and the second would make it longer. But in Haunted Castle, while you still get the chain whip as your first upgrade, the second upgrade instead gives Simon a sword, and something about this just never struck me the right way. The whip was always Simon's main weapon of choice, so to see him just use this stinky ass sword just feels wrong to me. Possibly another side effect of this being the series' first 16-bit game, I'd assume. Something else that's different about these whip upgrades is that after you get them, they're yours for good. Even if you die, you'll still get to keep them for the rest of your run. And while that is pretty cool, it does also unfortunately lead me into one of my biggest issues with Haunted Castle, and that is that you get absolutely no extra lives and only 3 continues. You run out and it's back to the beginning. You'd think that with this being an arcade game, they'd let you have as many continues as quarters you're willing to throw down the drain. But nope, to my understanding, all the quarters do is determine how many times you get to restart the game. So good luck beating this game authentically without paying a fucking fortune. Even weirder is that if you want to, you can use up your continues in order to expand your health bar, but I legitimately can't see that ever being useful outside of maybe the final boss fight. As bottomless pits are still accounted for, and they don't care how much health you've got, if you fall in, you die. Haunted Castle is very similar to Vampire Killer in that I can't see anyone who isn't a speedrunner beating it without cheats. Especially with how many little things it does that go against you. For example, the amount of health you restore after finishing stages seems completely random. Sometimes I got absolutely no health after finishing them, and sometimes it fully restored all of my health. If anyone out there actually knows how it works, please let me know, I am genuinely curious. And that is made even worse by the fact that Haunted Castle doesn't have any breakable walls, or health restoring items, so every single hit you take could prove fatal later on. But yeah, like Vampire Killer before it, I used save states with every new stage I go to. I really don't like doing that, as I want to look at these games as authentically as I possibly could, but if a game requires me to completely perfect it and do it all while only being able to mess up a very limited amount of times, that's where I sadly have to draw the line. However, Haunted Castle's biggest downfall is without a doubt its level design. Okay, so stages 1 and 2 are fine. Nothing mind-blowing, but solid good to hard Castlevania levels. But as soon as you take your first step into Dracula's castle, then the game will absolutely stop holding anything back, and just completely assault you with way too much shit. Fleamen were pretty annoying in the previous games, but in Haunted Castle's third stage, they spawn in infinitely, and even with the sword, will still take 2 hits to kill, whereas they only took 1 hit with the chain whip in the original. And it goes on to add falling chandeliers, a bunch of annoying ghosts, and even food and dishes that go on to assault you. And at one point, you even get teleported into another dimension and have to kill some harpies to get out. Everything in this game is on a fucking manhunt for Simon's blood, and while that is pretty narratively consistent with how much Simon fucked Dracula over in the past, so he, in return, is clearly just throwing everything he's got at him for this third round, but it sadly doesn't make for that great of level design. This is definitely the game with the most amount of bullshit yet. Even more than Vampire Killer, because while Vampire Killer was kinda more so annoying than it was hard, Haunted Castle is both annoying and hard, especially if you're playing the American version, titled version M, where the enemies do ungodly amounts of damage to you. Just look at the moving blocks from the first stage for an example. In the Japanese and European versions, aka versions E, K, N and P, these blocks only deal 1 point of damage, no problem whatsoever. But in version M, they take out half of your fucking health bar. Version M is the version I played when I first picked up Haunted Castle, and so it's no surprise I quit after the first stage, with how ridiculous the damage output is. I did not play version M for this video, and I wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemies, because if they were to somehow actually beat it, they'd probably make fun of me. Don't get me wrong though, despite being far easier, versions E, K, N and P are still way too fucking hard. If version M is like getting hit by a truck, then versions E, K, N, and P are like getting hit by a car. One of them is much worse than the other, but either way, you'd still probably fucking die, so what's even the point of choosing? I do think stage 4 is definitely more manageable than stage 3, with it mostly just being a simple straight line with a few enemies here and there. But then, stage 5 immediately opens up with this elevator section that is some downright bullet hell crap. There is absolutely no way in hell anyone has ever gotten through this section without getting hit at least once in their first attempt. Especially considering how slow Simon is in this game. And then the rest of the stage just goes on to throw more shit at you. It's not as bad as stage 3, but it's still some very poor level design. Luckily though, the sub-weapons are back, and are here to help even out the odds. Haunted Castle actually has quite a few completely unique sub-weapons. Like this cartoony bomb that just acts like the holy water, with the only difference being that its fire doesn't stay to hurt enemies for as long, making it kinda useless. But then we have the torch, which acts exactly like the holy water, meaning it's better than the bomb in every conceivable way. There's also this boomerang that you'd think will be the replacement for the cross, but it's more so the replacement to the knife in how it acts. Despite the fact that everyone knows that the boomerang's defining trait is that it's able to come back to you after you throw it. So why even make this piece of wood a boomerang in the first place? I guess it's not the replacement for the cross, because the cross is already in the game anyways, and it just acts like a far stronger knife. Well, so the sub-weapons kinda suck in this game. A lot of them are outright better than some others, and I have no idea why they would make brand new sub-weapons, only for them to just be almost identical to older ones in every way. I guess it helps give Haunted Castle a bit of its own identity, but I still find it bizarre. But if you've ever played Haunted Castle, you will no doubt notice that I neglected to mention one specific sub-weapon, being the absolute king of Haunted Castle's inventory, and that of course being the returning stopwatch. Not only does it allow you to freeze literally anything like in Vampire Killer, but it also only costs 2 hearts to use instead of the usual 5, making it without a doubt the best sub-weapon in the game. I basically just stuck with it since I got it in the second stage until the very end. Whenever I accidentally grabbed a different sub-weapon, I would always just load up my save state from the start of the level. And I never once regretted that. The only thing that kinda sucks about the stopwatch in Haunted Castle is that there is no visual or audio indicator to whether it's active or not, which kinda threw me off at times, though it's no big deal. But something about the way the game gave out items always seemed odd to me, and I wasn't able to pick up on why until I got to the third stage. And that is that unlike Castlevania 1, Haunted Castle doesn't have any breakable candles whatsoever, meaning you have to rely on enemy drops in order to get anything in this game. Now to its credit, enemy drops in this game from my experience seem to be very consistent. For example, this bet from the start of stage 2 always seemed to drop the chain whip, and another bet from later on in the stage always seemed to drop the stopwatch. But it's still something very integral to Castlevania that I don't get why they took out. Yes, Simon's Quest also didn't have any candles, but that game was designed so differently from this one, and they didn't really need them in my opinion. So Haunted Castle not having them just feels like it's artificially making the game more challenging, and it barely gives you any room for experimentation with the sub-weapons. Anyways, let's talk about the final stage. Hopefully you don't like bridges, because this one is really long and just won't stop breaking, damn it. So I hope you didn't get too emotionally attached. But yeah, this is just one stupidly long bridge that breaks as you walk through it, while bats try to stop you like every 2 seconds. Since Simon stops for a bit every time you swing, you basically have to swing at them in mid-air at the literal perfect frame in order to get through it unscathed. I would have been okay with this part if it didn't drag on for as long as it did, because as it is, this bridge takes almost 2 minutes to cross. Also, am I the only one who finds it really funny that by the time Simon gets to this part, the sun has already risen? Like, you'd assume that the sun would rise after he defeats Dracula, but I guess Simon just kinda took his time with this one, didn't really give that much of a crap by this point. Let's get this wrapped up by talking about the bosses. I was originally planning on complaining that the game doesn't show you their health bar like in earlier games, but these guys are honestly such a joke to the point where it's not even necessary in the first place. They're not as pathetic as Simon's Quest as bosses, but they still pale in comparison to the bosses from the original game. I will say that I do quite like many of their designs, especially this giant golem and this weird yet beautifully animated stained glass knight. It's just a shame they don't really do that much and can be easily cheesed with that stopwatch. This game definitely suffers from poor difficulty balancing, It's super all over the place and makes too many parts feel either cheap or underwhelming. And there is nothing in Haunted Castle more underwhelming than its final boss battle against Dracula. His first phase is pretty cool. He's a lot more dynamic than he was in previous Dracula fights, but he can be taken down relatively easily if you've got enough health. But then, the second phase comes in, and it just turns into this giant face, hanging out in the corner, as you start attacking him like crazy, starting to worry about what dangerous attack he might pull out at you. But then it just melts. That's it. This is one of the most pathetically easy final boss forms I have seen in the longest time. And I am saying that about Haunted Castle, one of the hardest, most unfair games in the series, where the final boss is literally the easiest part of the whole ordeal. The final boss in Simon's Quest was also a piece easy, but at least you had to have an idea on what you're doing when fighting him. In this fight, you can just go wild and you'll absolutely wreck him no matter what. Like the level design, I don't think it does thematically make sense for Dracula to be super weak in this game, since he literally already died twice in only the last 10 years, but again, just like the level design, it doesn't make for an overall better game. And it's not even like Konami even intended on any of this thematic shit for the fucking Castlevania arcade game anyways. So yeah, at the end, Simon watches over Castlevania as it gets submerged in the ocean, so Dracula will now be the fish's problem, dammit. With his saved wife you probably forgot even existed as well, and then it just abruptly throws you back into the first level. The ending is like only 10 seconds long and then it immediately just pulls out giant mood whiplash. I guess they didn't really care for the Castlevania lore as much as I do, huh? Well, that was Haunted Castle, and oh boy, that sure was a game. So yeah, Haunted Castle is sadly another pretty bad Castlevania game. It has some of the worst level design in the series yet, alongside some baffling design choices. It does definitely go above Vampire Killer for me, as at least Haunted Castle has a lot more unique stuff going for it, such as the unique art style and amazing OST. But those are things you can just look up nowadays. But when it comes to actually playing the game, there are far better than this one to check out. And unlike Simon's Quest, it didn't really do anything that pushed the series forward in any way. So I can't really say I have a lot of strong feelings about it other than, yeah, it's pretty bad. But I think this bad streak will end pretty soon, as next time, we will be looking at Castlevania 3, Dracula's Coup. Oh wait. Oh god damn it! Actually forget anything I've just said, because next time, we will actually be looking at the first ever portable Castlevania game, Castlevania The Adventure! See you all then.
God, why did they do this?